Sex in ancient Egypt played an important role in religion and mythology. Like people everywhere, Egyptians had affairs and suffered from love-making problems, which they treated with magic. Today we're talking about kinky facts about sex in ancient Egypt. But first, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. A vibrator made out of bees. Cleopatra was one of the rulers of ancient Egypt. She loved sex and pleasing herself. Cleopatra's purported sexual appetite is the stuff of legend and Shakespeare. When the Romans came around, Cleopatra had an illegitimate son with Julius Caesar. Later, she became romantically linked to Mark Antony, which ended up costing her life. But when her bedchambers were empty, Cleopatra allegedly found other ways to entertain herself. Rumor has it, she filled either a hollowed-out gourd or an empty papyrus box with angry bees, then used the makeshift device as a vibrator. To be clear, the bee vibrator story has always been a rumor of unknown origin and not verified fact. But the theory goes that the bees swarming around inside the contraption would have caused it to vibrate and move around, making it ideal for Cleopatra's supposed purposes. Prostitution. Prostitution in ancient Egypt was considered a divine and respectful act that was done to please the gods. Prostitutes enjoyed a relatively high status in Egyptian society. Unlike the prostitutes of today, they were allowed to work freely and openly. They used to signify themselves by wearing red lipstick and getting tattooed. Many accounts from early historians and scholars tell us that prostitution was an extremely common practice in ancient Egypt and was considered more like a business. Prostitutes from other parts of the world used to come to Egypt because here they didn't have to face any restrictions. Magic to attract the opposite sex. Voodoo dolls were one of the most common ways of casting magic in later times in Egypt. Sometimes this magic was directed at a woman by a man. In one case, a man had a magician make for him a voodoo doll of a woman he wanted no other man to have. The figurine was pierced with bronze nails and accompanied by a lead tablet inscribed with a spell. The spell wished that she would not be able to eat, drink, or to be with any other man besides himself. The text summoned a demon to pull her by her hair and intestines until she came to him. Homosexuality. The evidence for relationships between individuals of the same sex in ancient Egypt is sparse and controversial. There is only one clear case, and that is the myth of Horus and Seth. Seth and his nephew Horus were vying for the thrones of Egypt. One night, Horus pretends to be drunk, and Seth decides to take advantage of him and tries to rape him. But Horus tricks him by catching the semen in his hands. Another possible incident of intercourse between individuals of the same sex in ancient Egypt involves King Pepi II, the longest ruling king in history. A fragmentary papyrus contains a story where he is said to visit his general Sassanet at night and do as he pleases. But perhaps the most commonly cited example of homosexuality in ancient Egypt is the tomb of Neankum and Numhotep. The two brothers are depicted on the walls of their unusual joint tomb, holding hands and rubbing noses. Rubbing noses is considered the way kissing was depicted in ancient Egyptian art. Such tomb scenes usually depict a man and his wife. However, there is no hard evidence that the two brothers engaged in any sort of incestuous relationship. Extramarital affairs. Ancient Egyptians were okay with premarital sex, but they believed that once you're married, you must respect that union. They put more emphasis on women because they considered a married woman to be sacred, so an extramarital affair was taboo, especially if you were a woman. The punishments for those found guilty of infidelity were very harsh. From getting whipped, mutilated, and in some cases, even executed, everything was on the table. Things were not so harsh for married men. If a married man was found guilty of sleeping with an unmarried woman, he only had to deal with shame from society. The beginning of creation was by masturbation. The very first Egyptian god was Atum, who created himself. He had no wife, so to beget his children, Shu and Tefnut, he masturbated. The term, the god's hand, came to be associated with females over time, since Atum's hand played the female role in the original creation. Royal women of Dynasty 18 often bore this title, and it came to be very common as a title for the daughters of the Nubian kings who ruled Egypt in Dynasty 25. These daughters were responsible for the day-to-day administration of the country. Finally, in the Greco-Roman period, the term God's hand came to be associated with fertility goddesses, a far cry from its origins thousands of years prior. Weird methods of birth control. Using birth control was pretty common in ancient Egypt, and like the modern world, they had some degree of awareness regarding family planning as well. Although they didn't have the birth control pills or condoms that we have today, they came up with other methods of birth control. One method was using gum made from acacia tree sap to cover the mouth of the womb during sexual intercourse. Another method was applying a combination of honey and sodium bicarbonate to the inside of the vagina. The weirdest method was using a diaphragm of sorts made of crocodile dung. Not a virgin? That's fine. Unlike other ancient cultures and traditions, the ancient Egyptians didn't put much emphasis on virginity. If you married a virgin, good. But if you didn't, that's fine too. No one cared about that. Marrying a virgin didn't have any significance, neither culturally nor religiously. We recently wrote about sex in ancient Rome, and if you saw that video, you'd know how crazy they were about virginity. Anyways, the Egyptians weren't. A seductive but crafty woman. Women were sometimes portrayed as seductresses in Egyptian literature and culture. One of the most famous stories, the tale of the two brothers, tells a story very similar to that of Joseph in the Bible. Anpu's younger brother, Bata, lived with him and his wife. One day, while they were doing farm work together, Anpu sent Bata to the house to fetch some grain sacks. His wife was plaiting her hair, and when she saw Bata carrying 5 sacks on his shoulder, she told him she was impressed by his strength. She tried to seduce him. He became angry and refused her, but told her that he would not say anything to his older brother about what she did. However, the wife feared that Bata would snitch, and so she made herself up to look like she had been beaten up. When her husband returned home, she complained to her husband that it was Bata who tried to seduce her. Anpu became angry and was going to kill Bata, but he told him the truth about what happened and cut off his penis and threw it in the water to prove his point, where fish promptly gobbled it up. Anpu went home, killed his wife, and fed her to the dogs. Adultery was punishable by death. Like in any society, sex in ancient Egypt did not only take place within a marital context. Extramarital relationships surely existed, but they were not only frowned upon, but could be punished by death. A rather sordid affair is attested from the village Deir el-Medina, where the workmen built the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. A chief workman named Paneb engaged in all sorts of nefarious behavior, such as theft, corruption, and fighting. Adultery was one of his alleged crimes. He had intercourse with many married women, and his son even joined him in his escapades with an unmarried woman. In one case, he raped a woman by ripping off her clothes and throwing her on top of a wall. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the fastest growing history channel on YouTube.